The day HOA Karen tried to report my solar panels as illegal. I had just finished watching my electric meter run backward for the first time. It was a beautiful moment. Then came the knock. "Mr. Grayson," she said, arms folded, sunglasses on even though it was cloudy. "This installation is a direct violation of Section 9B of our HOA guidelines." Her name was Nadine Summers, and she was the head of our homeowners association, or as most of the neighborhood called her, Napalm Nadine. Middle-aged, always in pastels, always with a clipboard, and always one complaint away from a full meltdown. I leaned against my porch rail. Those guidelines were from 20 years ago before half the state went solar. "They haven't been updated," she snapped. "So they still stand. You didn't get written approval from the board." "Funny," I said, "because the city inspector signed off last week." "Got the permit right here." I held it up for her like a game show host. She didn't even look. "This is a private community, Mr. Grayson. City permits don't override HOA authority." There it was. The HOA power trip. I knew it was coming. I'd heard stories, fines for grass growing too fast, mailboxes repainted because they weren't neutral enough. But I didn't expect her to go after my solar panels. I installed them myself, 6 panels across the south-facing side of my roof. Took me 3 weekends, but I saved a fortune. I'm a mechanic by trade, but I know my way around a circuit box. And considering the power company had been jacking up rates every summer, I figured it was time I stopped playing their game. But Nadine couldn't stand the idea of anyone doing something without her permission. "You'll be receiving a formal violation notice," she said, stepping off my porch like she'd just sentenced me to prison. I didn't say anything, just waited, because I knew something she didn't. The HOA's charter had a clause buried in the fine print, one that hadn't been referenced in years. It said any homeowner could bypass board approval if the modification was related to state-mandated energy efficiency initiatives. And surprise, my solar installation sat squarely in that category. But Nadine didn't care about legality. She cared about control. 2 days later, I got the violation notice taped to my door. $50 a day until the panels came down. I laughed. Then I called my lawyer. By the end of the week, I'd filed a formal cease and desist against the HOA for unlawful enforcement. But Nadine wasn't done. She called in a private electrician. Tried to get the panels declared a fire hazard. That failed. She tried to say they were visible from the street and thus aesthetic pollution. That failed too. By the 3rd failed complaint, she was furious. The rest of the board seemed embarrassed. But she doubled down. Then one morning I noticed something strange. My panels had been disconnected, not from the roof. The wiring that ran underground to the main grid connection clean cut. I checked the camera feed from the night before. Nothing. She had to have done it during the day when I was out at work, and she must have had someone do it for her. Problem was, I'd installed a secondary line. One that ran under the garden bed, completely separate. She hadn't found that one, but I didn't reconnect it. Not yet. Instead, I let her think she'd won. Let her enjoy her moment, because Nadine had just made a criminal mistake, and I was done playing nice. The moment I confirmed the wiring had been cut, I drove straight to the county sheriff's office. Not the local precinct where Nadine's nephew worked dispatch. I wasn't taking chances. I brought photos of the severed conduit, time-stamped footage from the motion-activated floodlight my neighbor across the street had aimed toward my driveway, and the electrician's report confirming deliberate tampering. The deputy leaned over the evidence, eyebrows rising. "This isn't just vandalism, that's criminal mischief and unlawful utility interference." "Thought so," I said. "You think a warrant could shake loose who did it? Depends. You got reason to believe who's behind it?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid over a printout of an email that had circulated among the HOA board, one my buddy on the board had quietly forwarded me. It was from Nadine, sent 2 days before the incident, referencing a contractor who could help with the solar nuisance. The deputy narrowed his eyes. "You want to press charges?" "I want this on record," I said. Let's see how she handles a real investigation. Back home, I left the panels offline and let the system look dormant. I wanted her comfortable. While she was busy gloating, I was collecting receipts. I installed 2 more hidden trail cams, one in the birdhouse facing the street, the other tucked under the eave, and ran a new line from the panels to my detached garage. No one would see that one unless they climbed inside the rafters. Meanwhile, Nadine's house sat proudly at the corner of the cul-de-sac, with its tidy hedges and oversized floodlights. What she didn't realize was that her property shared a transformer junction with mine. When she had my line cut, it disrupted the grid balance. The power company rerouted the load to keep my neighbors unaffected, but Nadine's side bore the brunt. Within a week, her usage had spiked. Air conditioning, security systems, irrigation, timer, all drawing more juice than before, and she had no idea why. The best part: she'd opted out of the budget billing plan last winter, convinced she could game the meter by running everything during off-peak hours. So when her summer bill came, it hit her full force. I saw her expression when she opened the envelope. I was pulling weeds near the sidewalk, sunglasses on, watching her face turn the color of undercooked shrimp. She stormed across the street as if marching to war. "You rerouted something," she snapped. "I know you did." "Didn't touch your system," I said, not looking up. "Maybe you should call the power company, like a normal person. They said load distribution changed after your illegal setup went offline. Then maybe they should come check it out." I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my gloves. "If it's that important, I'm sure they'd be happy to investigate, especially since there's already an open case file." Her mouth twitched. "What case file?" "Sheriff's office has it. I filed a criminal report. Want the case number?" Her voice dropped. "You wouldn't dare involve them." I took a step closer, just enough for her to feel it. "I already did." She turned without another word, heels clicking back across the pavement like gunfire. 2 days later, a patrol car parked outside her house. Not a courtesy call. They served her a summons request for voluntary statement regarding the utility tampering investigation. The neighborhood grapevine lit up within hours. HOA board members started whispering, one even resigning quietly, citing stress. I didn't go to the meetings, but I got the minutes. Attendance dropped by half. No one wanted to get caught in her mess. One evening, I caught her husband, Greg, watering the front lawn. We'd never spoken much. He always kept his head down, but he gave me a nod this time. Eyebrows apologetic. I didn't respond. A week later, I received a second violation notice. This one claimed I had restarted an unauthorized solar system with a fine 5 times higher than the last. But this time, I was ready. I submitted a formal grievance to the State Department of Energy, citing harassment and unlawful obstruction of renewable energy implementation. I attached the full timeline: emails, tampering evidence, the sheriff's report, and the HOA's outdated bylaws. Then I reached out to a local news channel. They had a segment called Power Plays a Watchdog series on energy controversies. I gave them everything. The story aired the following Monday. They blurred faces, but everyone could tell who it was about. They cut to me on my porch explaining how I'd built the system, got permits, and complied with every rule only to be targeted because it didn't look right to someone who thought she ran the block. The camera panned to the HOA clubhouse, where Nadine had been holding meetings. "No comment," she'd said, practically slamming the door on the reporter. The fallout was immediate. Residents started demanding a vote to remove her. The bylaws required 2/3 support to recall a sitting HOA president. Within 3 days, the petition had more than enough signatures. But Nadine didn't go quietly. She tried to declare the petition invalid, claiming it was coerced by media interference. She even filed a cease and desist against the news station. It backfired spectacularly. The station aired a follow-up, this time interviewing neighbors anonymously. One revealed how Nadine had threatened to fine her over a wind chime. Another had been cited for excessive porch seating. The story went viral. Regional papers picked it up. A local councilwoman even quoted it during a town hall, calling for reform in HOA oversight laws. By the time the recall vote was scheduled, Nadine had already packed most of her things. Her house went up for sale a week later. As for me, I reconnected my panels. The power company came out, inspected everything, and gave me a certificate for exemplary residential renewable integration. They even asked if I'd consider joining a pilot program for surplus energy contributions. I didn't just beat the HOA, I rewired the rules. Literally. And Nadine. Last I heard, she moved into a gated community where solar was banned outright. Fitting, really. But I made sure of one thing before she left. I dropped a printed copy of her power bill in her mailbox. Anonymous envelope. No return address. Just one line written across the top in red marker. Sun's still free. You just picked the wrong side. It wasn't over, not yet. Nadine might have lost her title and packed up her life into a moving truck, but the board she'd corrupted still had its claws sunk deep into the neighborhood. Her influence had left behind a paper trail of shady decisions, and the worst of it hadn't even surfaced. 2 weeks after her recall, I got a knock not from a clipboard-wielding enforcer, but from a guy in a clean-cut gray suit holding a badge. Detective Roland, County Property Crimes Division. He stood on my porch with the quiet intensity of someone who didn't waste time on small talk. "You're Mr. Grayson?" he asked, flipping open a notebook. "Yeah, something wrong? Got a few questions about a series of unauthorized HOA expenditures. Your name came up in a recent interview." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the dining table, and he laid out what he had. Someone had submitted a request to the county auditor's office for a forensic review of the HOA's financials. That someone had also attached a suspicious number of reimbursement forms, dozens of them, filed under maintenance costs, that didn't match any actual repairs. Roland tapped one form in particular. This one's for a contractor listed as MWF Solutions. Paid nearly $9,000 over 3 months for electrical inspections. I scanned the document. The address listed wasn't a business, just a P.O. box across town. "Let me guess," I said. "No inspections ever took place, not officially, and this contractor, no license on file. No tax ID, looks like a shell company." I leaned back. "You thinking someone on the board used it to funnel cash, that's the theory." He paused. "And here's where it gets interesting. The first check to MWF Solutions was cut 3 days after your solar panels went live." There it was. "A direct link. Any idea who authorized those payments?" I asked. He nodded. "Every one of them signed off by Nadine Summers." I exhaled slowly. "So not just an abuse of power, fraud. Worse. She used HOA funds to pay someone to sabotage your system. That's criminal conspiracy." I told him everything I hadn't included in the sheriff's report: the overheard conversation between board members at the corner lot cookout, the mismatched invoice dates, and the email attachment I'd received anonymously just days earlier. It was a PDF unsigned with the subject line, "She went too far." Inside was a scanned copy of an internal HOA memo marked private, detailing a motion to authorize discretionary emergency spending, vaguely worded, but with Nadine's initials at the bottom. Roland took the file with him. "You'll likely be contacted by the district attorney's office. This is bigger than we thought." By the end of the week, 3 more board members had been subpoenaed. One lawyered up immediately. Another tried to claim ignorance but was caught in a lie during a deposition. The third, he flipped. His sworn statement confirmed that Nadine had hired someone, a friend of a friend, to inspect my electrical work and verify safety concerns. But there was no inspection, just a cash payment under the table and a quiet visit with wire cutters during my work shift. The DA's office moved quickly. A grand jury was impaneled within a month. They weren't just looking at Nadine, they were digging into the entire HOA's financial history. The clubhouse renovation budget, the landscaping contracts, even the neighborhood's insurance premiums, all riddled with inconsistencies. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was changing, faster than anyone expected. After the news broke, residents started showing up to meetings again, but now they came with questions. Real ones. They weren't satisfied with the usual, "We'll look into it." They demanded transparency. The interim board president, a retired teacher named Dolores Park, told me something over coffee one morning. "She used to scare people with fines," she said. "Now they're walking in with spreadsheets and asking where every dollar went." The real shift came when the county posted the results of the audit. Over $60,000 in miscategorized spending, most of it tied to vendors that didn't exist, and Nadine. She'd left town, but not the state's jurisdiction, arrested in Nevada. Booked on charges of wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and misappropriation of community funds. Her mugshot didn't make the evening news, but it circulated fast within the HOA's group thread. It should have felt like victory. But for me, it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what she represented: a system where one person could manipulate the rules, intimidate homeowners, and walk away with nothing but a slap on the wrist, if no one fought back. So I started something, not a campaign, not a protest. I launched a committee, Neighborhood Oversight for Financial Transparency. NOFT sounded boring, which made it harder to oppose. We met in garages, on porches, sometimes over barbecue. Our mission was simple: rewrite the HOA charter with built-in checks and balances. No more single-person approvals. No more unchecked spending. We proposed term limits, recall procedures, and a third-party mediator for disputes. It took 5 months and hundreds of volunteer hours, but we pulled it off. The new charter passed with 71% support, enough to lock it in for good. The HOA would never operate in the shadows again, and the best part? We didn't just stop corruption, we made it impossible to hide. The house next to mine sold during that time. A young couple moved in, both engineers, both curious about the solar setup. I helped them install their own, this time with proper permits, and a copy of the now revised HOA guidelines that explicitly protected renewable energy installations. One afternoon, the guy asked me, "You think there are still HOAs like that out there?" I looked across the street at the old clubhouse, now converted into a shared co-working space for residents. "There are," I said, "but not here." Not anymore. The power company sent me an annual rebate for surplus energy. I donated it to the local food pantry in Nadine's name. Petty, maybe, but fitting. The detective called me once more, months after the case closed. He said the district attorney had offered Nadine a plea deal. 5 years probation, restitution, community service. She took it, but part of the deal: she could never serve on an HOA board again, anywhere in the state. I watched the sun dip behind my roof that evening, the panels gleaming like armor. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to its people again, not to some petty tyrant with a clipboard and a grudge. We'd exposed the rot. We'd cut the line, and in doing so, we'd lit up the whole block. The first sign that something deeper was still festering came from a man with a clipboard, not the kind Nadine used to wield, but a real one, stamped with the seal of the county assessor's office. He showed up on a Tuesday morning while I was adjusting the tilt angle on the new winter panel brackets. He introduced himself as Marcus Hill, tall, measured, and polite, with a voice that rarely rose above a conversational murmur. "I'm here about a property boundary dispute," he said, flipping through the documents in his folder. "It involves an easement running behind your lot and 5 others." I wiped my hands and led him around back, where the narrow strip of land separated our fences from the old water retention zone land the HOA claimed to maintain, but no one had seen them touch in years. "What's the issue?" I asked. "There's a transfer request for ownership," Marcus said, "filed by the HOA before the new charter was ratified. They used an old plat map and submitted it under emergency infrastructure improvements." I blinked. "They tried to claim the easement, not just claim it," he said. "They're trying to reclassify it as HOA-owned green space. If it's approved, they can block access, enforce new landscaping rules, and even charge homeowners for use. The timing made my stomach turn. This wasn't Nadine's doing, not directly. But someone on that board had buried a land grab in the dying hours of her reign. I called Dolores immediately. She hadn't heard a word about it. Neither had the rest of the interim board. The application was filed under a name none of us recognized, Trevor Mayfield. "Never served on the board," Dolores said after checking the prior rosters twice. "Not once, but he signed as vice chair." I dug into the HOA's archived documents. Trevor Mayfield was a property investor who'd purchased a house 2 blocks over 6 months earlier. He never moved in. The house was gutted, the yard overgrown, and the windows still bore the stickers from the original manufacturer. The more I searched, the worse it got. Trevor had signed off on 5 separate funding transfers, all within a 3-week stretch. Each one marked for pre-approved infrastructure compliance and tagged with a different contractor name. None of those contractors had licenses registered in the county. It was a paper trail of ghosts. I brought everything to Detective Rowland, the same one who'd handled Nadine's case. He reviewed it all in silence, then made a call right there in my kitchen. Within a week, the district attorney's office had opened a second investigation, this time focusing on fraudulent land acquisition and identity falsification. The bombshell dropped when the tax records came back. There was no Trevor Mayfield. The name was fictitious, and the signature belonged to Nadine's husband, Greg. They'd used a shell buyer to purchase the vacant house, forged meeting minutes to appoint him as a board member, and then moved HOA funds into escrow accounts to begin acquiring land under false pretenses. But the worst part, the part that knocked the wind out of me, was that the forged purchase request for the easement included a clause allowing the HOA to install surveillance equipment and restrict access to enforce compliance. They weren't just grabbing the land. They were setting up to monitor and control it. The DA's office hit Greg with 6 felony charges, including forgery, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. When they raided the vacant house, they found a hidden server rack installed in the basement, powered by a generator and hooked into a cellular uplink. It had been recording footage from illegally installed trail cams mounted along the fence line. There was footage of me, my neighbors, even kids walking their bikes through the easement, all cataloged and time-stamped. Greg was arrested without incident, but the fallout didn't stop there. The forensic audit of the HOA's asset ledger revealed a string of unauthorized transactions stretching back over a year. Landscaping invoices for work never performed. Security upgrades that never materialized. Even a phantom contract for pest control that billed monthly to an address in Arizona. The HOA was bleeding money, and no one noticed until it was almost too late. Dolores convened an emergency meeting, this time open to the entire neighborhood. We held it in the community park, under the string lights that had been installed by a local Eagle Scout troop years ago, one of the few things the HOA hadn't managed to corrupt. I stood near the back as residents, one by one, stepped up to the microphone. "I paid for a fence permit 3 times, said a retired librarian. "They told me I had to replace my shutters because of color uniformity," said a man with a cane. "Then I found out the board president owned the painting company. My mother was fined for having a potted plant outside her door," said a young woman. "She died thinking she'd done something wrong. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to." The silence afterward was louder than anything else. Dolores stepped up at the end, holding a manila folder. "This is the motion to dissolve the current HOA entity and reconstitute it under a new charter, with third-party oversight, full transparency, and a resident-elected finance committee," she said. "Everyone who wants change, real, permanent change, sign here." When the folder reached me, I signed without hesitation. So did over 70 others that night. The vote passed 3 days later. The county clerk ratified it the following week. The old HOA, with all its entangled corruption, was officially dissolved. The surveillance equipment was removed. The server was seized, and the easement, restored to neutral status under county maintenance, protected from private acquisition for the next 50 years. Greg took a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison with restitution. Nadine, still under probation, was barred from contacting anyone in the neighborhood for the duration of her sentence. The vacant house was auctioned publicly. A young family bought it, moved in, and turned the neglected yard into a wildflower garden. The hole she left behind was deep, but we didn't fill it with more rules. We filled it with trust. There were no more secret meetings, no more surprise finds. Just neighbors sitting on porches, helping each other fix gutters, paint fences, and share solar data. One evening, as I adjusted the battery inverter in my garage, I saw Dolores walk by with her granddaughter. She paused at the end of my driveway. "You ever think it'd come to this?" she asked. "Not like this," I said. "But I'm glad it did." She nodded, watching the panels overhead catch the last light of the day. Funny how much trouble came from trying to block out the sun. We didn't laugh. We didn't need to, because we'd already won, not in court, not on paper. But standing here, in a neighborhood finally free to breathe again, and we weren't giving it back.